Oh, we're live. Okay, good. So I will bring us live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's going on, everybody? This is Andrew Ball, co-host of Point to the Spot, a U.S.-based podcast focused on the world of football. And today, as we have been known to do, we are focused in our own backyard in the U.S., looking at MLS expansion. Joining me, it seems like it's been a while. He's been busy working, serving those beers and making in lots of tip money. Mr. Reed Hammond, how are you, sir?
I'm great. I went to favorite barber in the world 2 weeks ago. Poochie's down on Lathrop, if you're ever interested. We'll cut that in post. I'm doing really well. Rolling in those tip monies. I don't think my employer knows that they pay me minimum wage on top of tips. I'm just not going to mention it.
Okay, so Reed is doing well then. And also joining the show, Mr. Jack Kelly. He's off to Europe, but for the time being, he has blessed us with his presence. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. Counting down the days until I don't have to deal with Reed for an entire week. But of course, I will miss you, Andrew.
That's what we like to hear. And our special guest, he's much more eloquent than either of these two guys. He writes for Firebird Rising, which covers Phoenix Rising FC in the land of the desert. He also is co-founder of Rising as One, a podcast covering Phoenix Rising. Mr. Dominic Kierans. Dominic, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Be careful what you wish for when you say I'm more eloquent. But yeah, it's great to be here with you guys and give the sales pitch for why Phoenix Rising should be an MLS city.
Well, it's a low bar, so I'm pretty sure you can meet it. Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on. I'm excited. I watched the second half of Phoenix Rising's game last night, including the exceptional Didier Drogba equalizer at the death. So now I feel like I'm an expert on all things Phoenix.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah. But we will turn it over to you, who is more of an expert on all things Phoenix. We're going to start off straight and simple. Give us the sales pitch. Why should Phoenix be the next MLS expansion city?
So, okay. Good question. I'll do this in two parts because I think before I give the main sales pitch, which is what Don Garber is looking for, the three factors, I should do a timeline because I think most of these listeners might not be familiar with all the details of what's happened in Arizona in less than 12 months. This time last year, there was a USL franchise, Arizona United. They were playing in front of under 2,000 fans a match out in Peoria, which is like 25 miles outside of downtown Phoenix, also on the west side, so just really far away from most people. It was not a really good situation there. So it kind of starts out with August of last year. Burke Mackay, his ownership group, buys the team from the former owner Kyle Eng, and that ownership group included Diplo at the time, who's still in on it, Brendan McCarthy, a couple other bigger names. And so then you're thinking, okay, maybe there's something that we're building towards. You give it a couple months, the USL season ends. Again, they fail to make the playoffs. And United rebrands as Phoenix Rising FC, and that came with a pretty kick-ass logo of a little bird kind of flying, and that also represents the city of Phoenix logo. So it's just kind of a really cool rebrand. And then in January of this year, so the expansion deadline to apply was January 31st, and this ownership group got in days before the deadline. We were one of the last ones to get in late January. And so at that time, people were thinking, I think at least the national perception was, we have our doubts. Like, okay, it's cute that they're in there, but I mean, there's Sacramento, there's Cincinnati, there are other bigger cities. And this is also before the San Diego bid and the St. Louis bid kind of got shut down for at least this year. So, okay, that's where we're at late January. So the buzz starts kicking in a couple months later. In March, before the season starts, we sign Omar Bravo and Sean Wright Phillips. Big signings. Omar Bravo played, as you guys are all familiar. He played for the Mexican national team for almost a decade. Legend over in Chivas for the Liga MX team, Chivas Guadalajara. And then Sean Wright Phillips, he played at Man City for a while. So they both are announced to much fanfare. But then the big news was then in April, Didier Drogba gets signed. This one was there were rumors about it going back to March, but it wasn't actually announced until early April. And that kind of ended weeks of speculation by some writers and whatnot. So, big signing, and you're thinking, boy, everything's going to be great. And then the coach of Phoenix Rising, Frank Yallop, resigns. A month later, we end up with Patrice Carteron coming in, respected coach out of France, but he's coached in Africa. He's coached in Saudi Arabia. So just a whole different perspective to the table. Turns out he's also good friends with Didier Drogba. So I think the thing that first shifted the narrative was Didier Drogba coming in, getting the attendance numbers from those first few games, and you're getting over 6,500 people to this team when we hadn't even been getting 2,000 before. I think a lot of that is due to the move. So they moved 40 miles east, closer to Tempe, so a little bit east of downtown Phoenix, if you're not quite familiar with the area, at a really good location, like two major freeways intersect, the 202 East, 101 North, and very close to the ASU campus, so there's more of a younger crowd at some of the games too. Just a really smart idea. They had a pop-up stadium, and it was built just in time for the opening match. So I think the pop-up stadium getting started, then the Drogba signing, I think those are the two biggest factors. So then in May, Don Garber came to visit Phoenix and, had some very positive takeaways. So we saw the Rising Soccer Complex. He met with the Salt River, the tribal community. So like their leaders. And then he got down to Arizona State University, met with the Arizona State Athletic Director, Ray Anderson, at Sun Devil Stadium, and they identified that as a potential temporary site, kind of like Atlanta United is playing at the Georgia Tech Stadium. A couple other places have done that. I know Minnesota is playing at the football stadium there. And so I think that's going to be a plan if we get announced to MLS. So those three things put us in a good spot. And it's gotten to the point now where I think most neutral national plaudits have us in their top four. So I don't know if you want to ask any questions. I guess a couple other things worth mentioning too. In May, we agreed with Golden & Sachs they'd be willing to be our financing partner for this new stadium. The pop-up stadium that we have in like the Tempe, Scottsdale area east of downtown, it's actually 45 acres of land that this ownership group bought from the local tribe. It was tribal land. And so there's enough space to have an academy, to have multiple fields, and to have a stadium for 20 to 25,000 fans, which is precisely what Don Garber would be looking for. And even just a couple smaller things. There were two very respected attorneys, Erwin Raj and Charles Baker, joined our advisory committee, and they've helped other teams in the past join MLS. They were involved in the LAFC expansion, and I want to say Atlanta and a couple others. So it's the big news headings, but I think a lot of the things behind the scenes, this ownership group is doing right. So now I'll turn it to questions.
Yeah, well, so I just had one quick follow-up. Something that we've kind of, because we've been doing this as a series, talking to a bunch of different places. We've done San Antonio and Cincinnati, a couple others thus far. And one thing that we're kind of hearing is that, that especially in these cities that have a lot of other stuff going on, that's one concern. Do you think in Phoenix, which obviously has NBA, NFL, ostensibly the Coyotes, will they be in Phoenix by the time you guys get an MLS team? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean that's quite a question. I won't speak on the Coyotes because I don't want to offend anyone. Although I do think MLS would already be bigger than them on day one. As far as there being a lot of other things to do, there are a lot of other things to do, but if you look at the attendance that we've had at Gold Cup matches, we've got, last year for Copa America, over 60,000. There was a U.S.-Mexico friendly a few years back that got 60,000. So our market has shown we can support soccer in a massive way. The consistency aspect is tough, but I think if you have names like Didier Drogba and all those people in the ownership group, and then you combine it with good signings and you're trying to make a splash right away, I think the fans will go. This is another point, because a lot of people say, oh, Arizona's a fair weather sports town. Arizona's like soft fans. They don't really support their teams. Well, Arizona's teams the last few years have been very tough to support. And that goes even off the field. With the exception of the Cardinals, the Coyotes have been embroiled in the stadium dispute. Their stadium is 20 miles west of downtown. It's the same problem that Rising had to deal with at their old stadium in Peoria on the west side. Most people live in downtown or a little east of downtown. So that kind of hurts them. Diamondbacks were just a trash product up until this year. And, now that they're playing well, they're actually drawing 35,000, 30,000 a game, which, by the way, Indians were doing well the last couple of years. They weren't drawing nearly that much. So I don't think Phoenix is a bad sports town. When the Suns were good with Steve Nash, they had a ridiculous 4 or 5 year consecutive sellout streak. And then the Cardinals, they have some of the loudest fans in the league for NFL, and they have quite a bit of a sellout streak there. I think it's every game since they built the new stadium over there. So I think to answer that question, Arizona is a decent sports town, especially if you have a good on-field product and an ownership group that actually cares. A lot of people are kind of frustrated with the Suns because bad on-court product, bad ownership group, and then some of the similar things with the Diamondbacks up till recently. This ownership group, I'll go talk about them in more detail later, but they have been exceptional to everyone, really. So,
And I know Reed has a killer Frank Yallop joke and a question, but real quick, one thing I didn't realize before kind of the MLS expansion kicked off is the Phoenix metropolitan area, which is sizable, is I think the 11th or 12th biggest in the country. So it seems to me that there are the numbers to go around population-wise to support the variety of entertainment options in the Valley of the Sun. But Reed, go ahead.
Me and Jack, being from Racine, Wisconsin, which is between Milwaukee and Chicago, our geographic local team is the Chicago Fire. So as two long-suffering Chicago Fire fans, we can draw a lot of parallels between our post-Frankie Yallop eras of success. And we hope that you guys have as good as one as we're running on right now. But onto a little bit more substantive.
How is that a joke? That is the worst joke I've ever heard in my entire life.
Okay,
that was just that was well wishes
on the Schweinsteiger, but I don't know where you're going there.
That was like nice well wishes. Okay,
it is not a joke. It was an anecdote. Leave me alone. I've had a long day. Oh my god. With that said,
I would be crying tears, but they just melted before it even hit the ground. So
yeah, no worries. We hear with Diplo and with Drogba, there was definitely a lot of fanfare around that. I want to hear a little bit more about the if you have anything else to say about the ownership structure. How big of a role do you think those two more celebrity owners are going to play? Technically Will Ferrell was a part owner of LAFC, but I don't really anticipate him having a lot of input. Do you think it's going to be a positive influence past just the fanfare, or what are your thoughts on that kind of celebrity ownership situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually to prepare for it, I made sure to get a screenshot of the whole ownership group breakdown, and so yeah, there are 4 people that are big enough names where a lot of common folk know who they are. So that would be Didier Drogba now, Pete Wentz, pretty self-explanatory there, Diplo, and Brandon McCarthy. From what I've seen, a lot of them are actually pretty involved. I can't speak on Pete Wentz as much, which makes sense because he's still putting out music. But Diplo, he's actually used some of his music and some of the other artists under the Mad Decent label in Rising promotional videos and that kind of thing. Actually, the kit sponsor this year is Mad Decent, his label. So there you go. There's some fuel for a Mad Decent joke later. And then Brandon McCarthy is funny because he must have been. I know he went to one of the home games this year when the Dodgers were in town to play the Diamondbacks. But I posted something on Rising as one day because we crashed out of the U.S. Open Cup and we lost because the feed went black for a few minutes. And then when the feed came back up, San Francisco had just scored the winner in stoppage time. And so I just put like an all black, like live look in at the game-winning goal. And he actually liked it on Twitter. So that shows you that he was actually watching and involved. And then as far as Drogba is concerned, I think Drogba has a major role in the ownership going forward. The story of how Patrice Carteron got here, he actually had the same trainer that Drogba had for some time. So they've been friends for a while. They both, go back to their French soccer ties. They actually played against each other in 2001. There's an interesting story that just came out from the local PBS website out here where I got that anecdote. But the fact is, like, they've been good friends for a while. So I think Drogba had a massive role in getting Carteron here to Phoenix to be the coach. And I have to imagine that Drogba will have a major role moving forward. They had a live press conference when Don Garber visited back in May, and Drogba was definitely participating. Phoenix Rising put out a video kind of recapping the highlights of the visit, and Drogba was featured on several occasions. So, to give you the TLDR, so to speak, I do think the celebrity owners are invested in this product.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It sounds like they're being used to their strengths. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
Yes.
Diplo isn't going to be asked about how long he thinks the pitch should be, which is like probably a good thing. And who knows, like, I think it'd be really interesting within the next couple years, like if Drogba moves into more of like a director of football or director of sporting operations kind of role. I think he would definitely be like a great influencer in that back room. I think it's pretty hard to say no to Drogba when he shakes your hand and says, "Hey, come play in Phoenix."
Well, and I think that was part of the allure of getting him to Phoenix in the first place. Do you want me to tell the whole Drogba to Phoenix story?
Sure.
Okay, so this one went back a while. This one goes back to Drogba's days at Galatasaray, because he was there for a season, I think, after Chelsea. And Berk Bakai, who's like the CEO of Kona Grill and the main guy behind this ownership group, his grandfather, I think, was one of the people on the ownership board over there. So he went to a lot of games growing up. He still has a big interest in Turkish football. So he wants Rising to make a big splash and get to MLS and do everything right. And so Berk is saying, "Hey, Drogba, would you be interested in coming out here?" And of course, like the first time Drogba hears that, he's like, "Are you crazy?" So every week for almost 6 months, Berk Bakai or other people in the Rising organization just kept following up with Drogba. "Hey, we'd love to have you out here. Whatever you want to do, if you want to get involved in ownership, we'd love to have you. We think you'd be a big voice. If you want to play, you can play." And the persistence paid off because they came to an agreement where Drogba will be playing this year and next. Then he transitions full-time into the ownership group. And he also has some stock in the team. So just seems like a win-win on all fronts. But I think that also shows a lot of people that might not be as familiar with Berk Bakai and this group just how persistent they are and really how they're willing to go the extra mile, in my opinion.
Staying on the topic of Didier Drogba, because, why not? To me, at least from like an outside kind of neutral perspective, having, been observing all of these different expansion bids, and I don't know, Andrew and I a little bit more than, your average person do follow the USL fairly closely. Do you think that having someone like Didier Drogba, who is, world-renowned superstar, he's been everywhere, he's been there, done that, Champions League winners and all of these things, do you think that having him be the face of a franchise in an area where you're trying to grow, like, in organic soccer culture, is something that's positive for, growing that culture and having them there? I mean, it's got to be good for the bid because it draws attention, but do you think that like having him be the face of the club, because he kind of has become that, he's, when you see Phoenix Rising, whether it's from, the USL putting something out on their social media, like it's often him highlighted. Do you think that that's something that could hurt the team or the club, being that, he is only going to be around for 2 seasons, and that, like, I know he is going to be a part of the ownership group, but is it something where you want to be more organic and have it grow based on the players that you have rather than riding on the, on the big name? I mean, we've seen it with like FC Cincinnati, in Portland, in Sacramento. Like they don't necessarily have huge name players and have been very successful. Do you think Phoenix will be able to carry on that success once somebody like Didier Drogba kind of transitions into the behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely. And I do see where you're getting at. You don't want one person to be so overly identified with the club that once they're gone, they kind of face a crisis. But I think that problem is not as serious because he does stay on in ownership afterwards. Also, if you do follow the team a little closer, I mean, Drogba has been a huge player for scoring goals, but I think there's a lot of talent. And one of the major parts of this expansion bid for Phoenix is that we want to have an academy here. We realize that there's a ton of local talent in the Arizona area, and a lot of it gets scooped up by, for example, the Real Salt Lake Academy. They have an academy in Arizona to poach Arizona talent. Other people go to California. And so we're trying to keep some of that talent in state and build it through the academy. That would be a large part of the MLS expansion push. And I think the goal from Burke Buckeye on down is that we have that culture if we get into MLS and we can keep things rolling. So
that's cool. And then something else that is always kind of important, or like I feel is important and drives success of a team is, I mean, we've talked about it. They have like Phoenix Rising Soccer Complex, and we've talked about how it's a little bit outside of the city. Like, what is the accessibility to the complex like? Like, let's say they were to build their 25 or 24,000, SSS out there. Is it, accessible? Public transit go out that way? Can fans get there easily? Like, would they be able to fill those 25,000 seats, for people that, come from all different demographics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it sounds like there are a few parts. So I'll hit the public transit part first. The light rail, it goes from downtown Phoenix. It actually goes further west than that too, quite a bit further west than that. And it's just kind of an east-west thing. It goes to a stop that's 1.8 miles south of the stadium. So there's nothing that goes directly. That admittedly is something that would potentially have to be worked on. However, if you're within 2 miles of the stadium, it's not too difficult to get an Uber, get a Lyft, or even take a bus. There is a bus stop nearby. And then as far as catering to different demographics, there's a huge Latino population. I don't think that would be too much of an issue. That tends to be a large portion of the crowd for Gold Cup and Copa America when it's out here. And then also, Arizona teams tend to have pretty reasonable ticket prices as opposed to a lot of other major markets. And I think the ownership group is cognizant of that. I don't think they're going to open the new stadium and have the cheapest seats be, $50 a pop. So.
No, that's cool. We see this thing. It's a running joke on the podcast is that there is a direct relationship between light rail and MLS cities.
I love a light rail. You know what I mean? Like, I hate Breck Shea. I love I love a couple other Wondolowski shaped USM and team players.
Okay.
And I love light rail. So Andrew, please carry this podcast for me right now.
I also love light rail. Don't know what just happened. Moving on. One thing that kind of MLS has not really made any secret that they're trying to reach out more, certainly to Latinos and Hispanic Americans, but also even to people in Mexico to start watching, or Mexicans in the U.S. to start watching MLS. Phoenix is not like San Diego. You're not like literally right across the border from Mexico, but in the Southwest, obviously a very diverse population. You mentioned this already, that the Gold Cup and friendlies have gotten that demographic to University of Phoenix Stadium. Have you seen at Arizona United and now Phoenix Rising games that they've tried to reach out to the Hispanic in the greater Phoenix area? Is that something that you think a club would find success doing that maybe Dallas or Houston hasn't?
Yeah, I think so. If you go to the Phoenix Rising FC website, they have article archives, and actually they post a lot of articles in Spanish as well. So they're trying to appeal to a different audience. I think, pragmatically speaking, I think that's a large reason why Omar Bravo did sign on here. I mean, he's got some game left, but he's definitely a little past the prime. But especially early in the season before Drogba came, that was a huge factor in getting people to matches. I can also say this: you tend to see people with Omar Bravo Chivas jerseys at every home match and at a ton of away matches as well. So I think if they can continue in that tradition and maybe always have like one or two either young promising Mexican players or veterans who are maybe on the downswing, but if they can just keep that legacy going, I think there's a very receptive market to it. And as far as posting a lot of the recap articles bilingually on the team website, with Firebird Rising, we also try to do recaps bilingually too. We have someone on staff that can do that, and so whenever possible, he'll do just especially for big games, he'll do a Spanish translation. So,
that I feel like that's something that MLS clubs around the country right now lack, is that Spanish language coverage of stuff. You see it, a couple of other USL sites do too. Tulsa, I know for a fact, does.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge draw and very important thing to do.
It's actually like a super weirdly low number of MLS teams that do any multi-language coverage. Like, I know the Chicago Fire do almost all of their stuff. I know New York does like every language under the sun. It's like, I'm confident that they're the only ones still propping up Rosetta Stone. But like past that, it's literally 7 of the clubs. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I don't think FC Dallas does, which is
mind-boggling,
dumbfounding. Yeah.
Dominic, I have to know, Phoenix unbeaten in their last 5 league matches. It has been a rousing 4 straight draws. In 10th place right now in the Western Conference standings of the USL. Are they going to make it into the playoffs? Are they going to do something? They're going to stir the pot. When we come the fall, I guess. USL playoffs kick off, I think, in September.
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt about that. Here's the thing. We've played 14 matches. Most teams have played 16 or 17. Our last 4 opponents, who we did get 4 draws against, here's a little fun fact. Swope Park, Real Monarchs, and Reno beat their opponents this week by a combined scoreline of 20-2. So we just went up against 3 of the 5 hottest teams in USL, 2 of them at their home building, and we got 3 positive results out of it. Then this week we went to Orange County, who had also been on a win and a draw, and dominated the game. And unfortunately, stupid goal to concede late, but we get the equalizer. No, we're fine. I mean, I think early in the year, our defense was a huge concern. We also had a lot of roster shuffling. I mean, we got Bravo in for opening day. I don't think Sean Wright-Phillips debuted on opening day. Drogba didn't come into the lineup until a few weeks ago, June 10th. Same with Amadou Dia, who's already made a USL Team of the Week and been a huge contributor at left back. And Eric Avila's come on as a sub, Eder Areola. These are guys who were not in the first team to start the year. They weren't even on our roster to start the year. Then you have to talk about Frank Yallop, who is our coach the first few weeks, resigns to spend more time with his family. So we have an interim coach for over a month, and we're just treading water. And then we get Carterone in here, and since Carterone and Drogba and Dia all debuted, we haven't lost. So, yes, I mean, people thinking that we're going to be top 2, 3 in the conference, preseason, me and the podcasters were talking about this. That seemed kind of unrealistic, but the way the schedule shakes out, it gets a lot friendlier as the year goes on. We have more home matches in September and October, which makes sense to get out of the heat. And we finally get to play Timbers 2 twice. We haven't played them yet. So we've already gotten through like a lot of adversity. And if you're looking at it from a points per match perspective, we're top 8. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to guarantee we're going to win the whole thing. But I think the best is yet to come, especially since some of these guys still have been here for less than a month. And we have been really up against it all season. It feels like we've been on an uphill battle all year. We're just kind of there still.
I will say really quickly, as someone who never sleeps, the September and October Arizona United home matches were my favorite thing because it was soccer at like 11 o'clock at night, and it was amazing. I knew like half the Arizona roster by heart by the end of it. It was great. I love it. Just want to get that in there.
Oh, hell yeah. That's awesome.
Hey, for our listeners,
responsible for that, but
for our listeners, going back to that Portland, the Timbers 2 point, Portland has played 17 games from which they have gained 5 points and have currently on a streak of losing 4 of their last 5 matches. If you are wondering why it's a big deal that they get to play the Timbers 2.
Wait, did they actually beat Los Dos today though? Because they were up 2-0.
Oh, I don't know if they did.
It was the crap bowl. Like battle for last place. I think let's see. But they were winning 2-0. So I'm actually curious.
Think the standings up yet. Oh no, Los Dos came from behind.
They won?
4-3 win. Yep.
Incredible.
This is why the USL is the greatest league in the world.
The fall of Los Dos is wild.
People. I was joking with my co-podcasters because Los Dos made it 2-1 just before halftime. We were still on. I'm like, watch us be a 5-5 draw, and it wasn't that far off.
And I just want to try to save myself from my earlier misstep with my Frank Yallop joke, which in the end was an anecdote. Okay, an actual Frank Yallop joke. I think there are shades of David Moyes in Frank Yallop in that. To quote the evergreen Stormzy, I come to your team, I fuck shit up, I'm David Moyes. He's just a bad coach. He's just a bad... Frank Yallop is just not... He's not good at soccer. It's not his thing.
Here's the thing. Very nice guy. So I did get to speak with him a couple times. I think it happens not just in soccer, but a lot of sports. The game passes you by at a certain point. He won a couple MLS Cups. Shouldn't take away from that. And yeah, like you're saying about Moyes, he is a big name, so everyone respects him. It's like, oh, Frank Yallop, yeah. But as far as our actual tactics, it was a shit show the first month. So yeah, I'm with you. The defense has definitely improved in the last couple months. So yeah.
The joke of Frank Yallop is just Frank Yallop. Anyways, Dominic,
MLS Cup winner. Don't forget.
Anyways, Dominic, that is all we have for you. Where can our listeners find you and Firebird Rising, your podcast? Where can they find all of those things on the social media world, or the social as Reed would refer to it?
So that would be at Rising Pod is where you can find our podcast. And then, Firebird Rising is firebirdrising.coreair, KORRAIR.com. That's where you find a lot of the recaps. If there's ever a big player being signed. Our Twitter is usually a fun follow if you're just trying to get some fun GIF action going on during the matches. Kind of the stuff that the team social media guy can't do. We try to go with that. So, yeah.
I love
By
it.
the fans, for the fans.
I love it. Reed, of course, where can they find you?
At that one kid Reed.
And Mr. Ball.
At Andrew Ball, BAHL.
Of course, guys, you can find me at actual Jack Kelly. I am actually Jack Kelly. Dominic, thank you very, very much for coming on and speaking with us. I think we thoroughly enjoyed this. And,
Thanks for putting up with Reed's Frankie Allop joke.
Yes, thank you for
Frank Gallup, he kind of is a joke.
MLS Cup winner.
Yes, people forget that. But I didn't even mention it's at DomK49. That's my personal Twitter. And if you guys ever want to talk European soccer, let me know.
Yeah, we definitely will. Because we are cordial, we always wish our guests the best in their respective cities' MLS expansion bids. So we are pulling for Phoenix as we are pulling for everybody else. Hopefully, things come your way, and there's a 5th major sports franchise in Phoenix.
Yeah, did you guys? I'm sorry here, but we didn't even get into like the comparing Phoenix to other cities kind of thing. Did you guys want to ask a question about that? Maybe
We can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
Dom, I'm an excellent editor, okay? So there will be 0 Reed gaffes by the end of this edit, and this question will be seamlessly placed.
Okay, so I'm going to fake outro, and then we'll go back and ask you a question.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, again, Dominic, thank you very much for joining us. Guys, that is all the time that we have for today. Make sure that you check out Firebird Rising online and on Twitter. And who knows, maybe we'll be catching an MLS game in Phoenix in the not-too-distant future. For now, though, that's all the time we have. Thanks for listening. And then we'll come back around. Who would you like to most compare Phoenix to?
Oh, as far as MLS cities are concerned.
Who are your main competitors? I'll ask the question that way.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to phrase it.
Yeah.
So,
San Antonio?
I'm gonna be realistic here. I think I saw an article a couple weeks ago from a guy who I do respect, Chad Smith, really good guy, but he had Phoenix as number 1 on his expansion list, and I think you got to pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah.
Because Sacramento has been around for a long time. They have a really solid stadium plan in place, and as much as I love Phoenix, and I think I don't know how Sacramento could be screwed over again. Then again, it is Sacramento, so that's a joke in itself. But I mean, they should realistically be the next team in. Then you talk about Cincinnati. I think if they can get their stadium thing in order, that probably they're ahead of us. Even though they don't have the one huge name on board, they have the support, which is crazy. My personal opinion is I think they're going to end up playing in Northern Kentucky because they're going to get the public money from Kentucky because Kentucky hasn't been fucked by a stadium yet. So that's usually how those things work. And then as far as the other cities, I think as long as San Diego doesn't have its thing together, that bodes well for us.
Which
they might, so no guarantees. That would be a real competitive city if they do. San Antonio, I think, can support MLS. I just don't understand why they would be selected over us because everything they have, we have a little bit better. So it's a larger market for TV purposes. We have a larger Latino population. And that's not to diss San Antonio. They have a great team. The San Antonio Spurs ownership group is really good for them. And they do get very comparable attendance figures. I think they've been getting over 7,000. But I think San Antonio and Sacramento would be our biggest competitors. And then if Nashville gets their thing going, that would be potentially problematic.
Dom, real quick, are you secretly a listener of the pod? Because like everything you've said were like the words that were gonna come out of my mouth. I was gonna be like, oh well, San Antonio does have that nice Spurs ownership, and I was gonna say like, oh, and as far as like the second wave of in my bracket, my mental bracket of MLS expansion, for me is about San Antonio, Phoenix, and Nashville, and. You knocked all the pegs. So I just have to ask, have you quietly been listening to all of these podcasts?
I may or may not have listened to a couple on a long road trip within the last 7 days.
I think you're now like way up on the guest power ranking.
Oh, yeah.
Dominic, you are officially the superior friend of the pod.
Oh, yeah.
Does that put me on the Mount Rushmore?
Oh, yeah. Right now it's Cesar and then you.
Yeah,
no. Cesar, then you. Then
there's
Dom.
only 2 faces on Mount Rushmore right now, and you are half of them.
And then where's Reed's?
Oh, no, I don't get one.
Reed doesn't even. Reed is like.
I'll get a plaque.
You know how like so often like very important. Well, we're not gonna say Reed's very important. Significant parts of something are like designated down to nothing down to more than like a little tiny baby like plaque on a little tiny statue in a court. That's Reed.
He basically he's calling me the Ringo of this. I am not the Ringo. Okay.
Well, spin zone. That means you'll live longer than everyone else.
Old age isn't what it's cracked up to be. I'm fine.
Oh,
Jack, should we
Oh yeah, we can unbroadcast now. Yeah, sorry.